The doctor looked at me over the top of his clipboard and said, "We have maybe 2 hours before this becomes irreversible." I was 17 years old, lying on a gurney in the emergency bay of St. Carver Medical Center, and I could not feel my left leg. My mother was 45 minutes away at a spa resort with my stepfather. They had taken my half-sister, Brooke, for what she called a family reset weekend. I was not invited. I never was. The nurse had already called her twice. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the part that came before it. My father died when I was 4. I don't have many memories of him. A flannel shirt, the smell of coffee, his laugh that started slow and then took over the whole room. My mother remarried when I was 7, and within a year of that wedding, it became clear to me in the way that children understand things before they have the words for it, that I was no longer the point. I was a leftover from a previous chapter, something she had to deal with. My stepfather, Ray, was not a cruel man in the dramatic sense. He never hit me. He never screamed at me. He simply acted as though I were a roommate who had overstayed his welcome, polite enough at the dinner table, genuinely unbothered when I wasn't there. My mother followed his lead, the way she followed his lead on everything: which neighborhood to live in, which church to attend, which kid mattered. Brooke was born the year after the wedding. She was beautiful and easy and adored, and I did not blame her for any of it. She was a child. She didn't ask for the dynamic any more than I did. What I'm saying is, I grew up understanding my position. I was tolerated. I was housed and fed and enrolled in school, which I suppose clears the legal bar. But loved? Chosen? No. The one exception was my uncle. My father's younger brother, Spencer, had stayed in our lives after Dad died, which I know now was not easy. My mother didn't make it comfortable for him. He showed up anyway. Birthday cards, weekend visits when I was younger, phone calls that got longer as I got older. He was a landscape contractor, never married, lived in a small house outside of Asheville, North Carolina, with 2 dogs and more houseplants than any single man should reasonably maintain. He was 41 when I was 17, and he was the only adult in my life who asked me follow-up questions. What do I mean by that? I mean that when I told him something, he remembered it the next time we talked. He asked what happened with the thing I mentioned last month. He showed up to my one and only varsity track meet when I was a sophomore, drove 4 hours round trip, stood at the finish line in a jacket that was too light for the weather, and cheered like I had won something important. I came in 5th. He acted like I'd won the whole thing. That's who Spencer was. The accident happened on a Saturday in October, which is still the cruelest month to me, even now. My mother and Ray had hosted a family gathering at our house the day before. Ray's family, mostly, cousins and aunts I had met a handful of times, and whose names I could never reliably keep straight. My mother had spent 3 days preparing for it and approximately 0 minutes making sure I felt included in it. I spent most of the party in my room with the door closed, which nobody noticed. The next morning, I was supposed to drive to Spencer's place. We had plans he was going to show me how to winterize his irrigation system, which sounds boring, but was actually just an excuse to spend a day together. He always came up with practical reasons to see me. I think he understood that my mother was more likely to allow the visit if it had a stated purpose. I left before anyone else in the house was awake. It was early. The roads were still dark at the edges, and I was taking the mountain stretch of Route 9 that cuts through the gorge between our town and the highway. I'd driven it 100 times. What I didn't account for was the ice. Late-season frost. The kind that settles on asphalt in hours just before dawn and looks like nothing until your tires find it. I came around the bend near the Harker Creek Bridge, hit the patch, and that was it. My car left the road, went through the guardrail, and rolled down the embankment into the shallow creek below. I don't remember the impact. I remember the sound the car made, a low grinding that seemed to go on too long. And then I remember waking up on my side. Water coming in through the broken window, and not being able to move my left leg. Someone had called 911 from the road above. I don't know who. I never found out. The paramedics got me out. The ER doctor, whose name was Dr. Okafor, was direct with me in a way I still appreciate. He didn't soften it. "You have a spinal contusion and significant internal bleeding," he said. "We need to operate. We need consent from your legal guardian." I gave them my mother's number. They called. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I was not in the room for that conversation, but Dr. Okafor told me about it afterward, and I have thought about it many times since. She asked how serious it was. He told her. She asked how long the surgery would take. He told her. She said, and I want to be precise here because the doctor repeated it to me, word for word, we're actually in the middle of something right now. Can this wait until this afternoon? He's pretty tough. He'll be fine. Doctors mate until this afternoon. He's pretty tough. He'll be fine. Okafor told her it could not wait. My mother said she would call back. She did not call back. Spencer got there before she did. I had asked the nurse to call him after the first attempt to reach my mother failed. He was the only other number I had memorized. I didn't think of it as anything dramatic at the time. I just wanted someone I knew to be there. I was scared and I was in pain, and the overhead lights were very bright and I wanted a familiar face. He answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" he said, before I even finished explaining. "St. Lestat. Carver. I'm coming." He drove 2.5 hours. He arrived while I was still waiting for surgical consent, which means he got there in time to sit beside my gurney in the hallway and hold my hand while the nurses worked around us, and to be the one who listened when Dr. Dockers, Okafor, came out a second time and said, quietly, that they were running out of time. Spencer looked at the doctor. Then he looked at me. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Dr. Taz," Okafor explained, that is next of kin, specifically as the paternal uncle of a minor. Spencer could petition for emergency temporary guardianship, which would allow him to consent to the surgery. It was not a simple process, but the hospital had a social worker and an on-call attorney who facilitated these situations. Spencer stood up. "Tell me what to sign," he said. I went into surgery at 11:14 in the morning. I came out at 2:47. My mother arrived at 4:15 with Ray and Brooke, who was wearing a swimsuit cover-up and carrying a smoothie. She had, apparently, finished her spa day before making the drive. I was in recovery and still mostly unconscious when they arrived, which is how I know what I'm about to tell you. Because a nurse told Spencer, and Spencer told me later, with the careful, measured voice he uses when he's trying to stay calm. My mother walked into the waiting room, saw Spencer, and said, "Why are you here?" He told her what had happened. He told her about the emergency guardianship. He told her that her son had been in surgery for 3.5 hours and had been asking for her. She said, "Well, he's fine, right?" So it worked out. Spencer told me he looked at her for a long moment before he answered. "Yeah," he said. "It worked out." I woke up to a ceiling I didn't recognize and the sound of Spencer's voice talking to someone quietly near the window. My mouth felt like chalk. The light in the room was the pale gray of late afternoon. "Hey," Spencer said, when he saw my eyes open. He pulled his chair close. "You scared the hell out of me?" I asked him what happened. He told me the short version first. Then, over the next hour, sitting in that hospital room while the monitors beeped softly and the nurses came and went, he told me the rest. The calls to my mother. The paperwork he'd signed. The temporary guardianship that had allowed the surgery to happen. "What does that mean?" I asked. "The guardianship." "Right now it means I could consent to your surgery," he said. "Going forward." He stopped, looked at his hands. "I filed for more than temporary. I want to be honest with you about that." I stared at him. "I talked to an attorney on the phone on my way here," he said, "given the circumstances. Given what your mother said to the doctor." He paused. "I want to do this properly and legally, but I want you to know what I'm asking before any of it goes further, because you're the one it affects." I was 17 and I was still coming out of anesthesia and I started crying, which I hadn't done during any of it. Not during the accident, not during the wait, not during the recovery room. Spencer put his hand on my arm and didn't say anything, which was the right call. After a while I asked him. "She actually said, can it wait until this afternoon?" "That's what the doctor told me." I looked at the ceiling. "Okay," I said. "Okay, what?" "Okay, do it properly and legally." My mother did not react the way I expected. I expected anger. I expected her to fight. She was, after all, my legal parent, and whatever her failures in the warmth department, I assumed she would at least assert her position. Instead, she was almost immediately dismissive. When Spencer's attorney contacted her, she said, and this was documented, which became relevant later, that she didn't understand why Spencer was making this into a whole thing, and that she would deal with it when things calmed down. She did not attempt to visit me again during my hospital stay. She sent a text on my third day there asking if I needed anything from my room at home. I said no. Brooke texted separately, which surprised me. She was 11 and should not have been navigating any of this. But she wrote, "I'm sorry you got hurt. I told Mom she should have gone right away." I saved that message for a long time. I was in the hospital for 9 days. Spencer stayed for the first 4, sleeping in the family chair with a travel pillow, then drove back to Asheville to check on his business and came back for the last 2. He brought me 3 books, a portable speaker, and a 6-pack of fancy root beer. He sat with me while physical therapy worked on my leg. He asked Dr. Okafor questions that I didn't know to ask and took notes on his phone. On the 6th day, a social worker named Ms. Teague came to speak with me. She explained the guardianship process in plain terms. She told me that Spencer's petition had been formally filed, that a family court hearing had been scheduled, and that I had the right to express my own preferences, given my age. She asked me what I wanted. I told her. The hearing was 3 weeks after I was discharged. I was still on crutches. My mother appeared with an attorney, which told me she had decided to contest it. I felt something drop in my stomach when I saw her walk in. Not fear, exactly, more like a final confirmation of something I had always suspected, but kept giving her the chance to disprove. She had chosen, even now, to spend money on a lawyer instead of just showing up to my hospital room. Her attorney made the argument that the emergency circumstances had been misrepresented, that my mother had been in the process of traveling to the hospital when the surgery began, and that Spencer had essentially taken advantage of a window of opportunity to insert himself into a family matter. Spencer's attorney put Dr. Okafor on the phone. He recounted the conversation with my mother, word for word. He confirmed the timestamp of her consent refusal. He confirmed the timestamp of the surgery authorization. He confirmed that my mother had arrived at the hospital 4 hours and 1 minute after his first call to her. The judge was a woman with short gray hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain. She looked at the documents for a long time. Then she looked at my mother. "You were 45 minutes away," she said. "At a resort. When the hospital called." My mother's attorney said something about mitigating context. The judge took her glasses off. "I'm not interested in mitigating context," she said. "I'm interested in what this child needed and what this child got." She ruled in Spencer's favor. I moved to Asheville 2 weeks later. Leaving was strange. I had lived in that house for most of my life, and whatever its failures, it was the geography of my childhood. My room, the particular creak of the 3rd stair, the way the kitchen smelled on Sunday mornings. I packed 2 duffel bags and a backpack. Spencer had borrowed a truck from a friend and drove up to help. My mother stood in the doorway while I loaded the truck. She didn't offer to help. She didn't say anything for a long time. When I was almost done, she said, "You're going to regret letting him turn you against us." I thought about that for a second. "I'm not turned against you," I said. "I just need to go somewhere I actually matter." She didn't respond to that. I got in the truck. Spencer didn't ask me how I was feeling as we drove away, which I appreciated. He turned on the radio and handed me a bag of chips from the gas station stop we'd made that morning and just drove. After about an hour, he said, "I'm gonna need help naming the new houseplant." I got another one. It's a big one. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in about a month. "What kind?" "I have no idea. The lady at the nursery told me, but I forgot immediately." Spencer, I know. Living with Spencer was nothing like living at home, and I mean that in every possible way. He cooked actual meals, which sounds like a small thing but was not. He asked about my day and then listened to the answer. He had a dog named Ruckus who slept on the end of my bed within 48 hours of my arrival, as if he'd always been there. Spencer had converted his garage into a workshop, and on the weekends I started helping him with projects. Not because I had to, but because it was something to do with my hands while I was still rehabbing my leg. And because Spencer explained things patiently and never made me feel stupid for not knowing them. He came to every one of my physical therapy appointments. Every single one. My leg recovered fully, which Dr. Okafor had said was not guaranteed at the time of the surgery. The nerve damage from the contusion could have been permanent. Spencer had a way of reminding me of that without being dramatic about it. Occasionally, in passing, in the middle of some ordinary moment. "Remember when we weren't sure if you'd walk right again," he said once, while we were grilling on the back porch. "Look at you now." That's all he said. Then he went back to watching the Coles. I'm 27 now, which means almost a decade has passed since the accident. I work in structural engineering, which I probably would not have chosen if Spencer hadn't spent those early months showing me how things were built and why they held. I live 40 minutes from his house, and I have dinner with him most Sundays. My mother and I are not close, but we are not enemies. There's a version of the story where I cut her off completely and never looked back, and for a long time I thought that was where it was going. But it's hard to maintain that kind of clean break when someone is still technically your mother, and you have a half-sister who did nothing wrong. Brooke is 20 now, and we talk regularly. She is nothing like our mother. She is loud and funny and blunt, and was honestly more upset about the accident than my mother ever appeared to be. We figured each other out gradually, across years of sporadic texts and then longer phone calls and then actual visits. She stayed with me for a week last summer, and we hiked most of the day and argued about movies at night, and it was good. My mother remarried after Ray, which I found out through Brooke and did not particularly register as news. I sent a card for my mother's 60th birthday last year. She sent back a thank you text that was 3 sentences long. We exist at that distance now, and I have made peace with it mostly, in the way that you make peace with things that are not fixable. Not with joy, but with clarity. What I think about most, when I think about all of it, is not the accident. Not even the hearing. I think about the moment in the hospital hallway when Spencer said, "Tell me what to sign." I have tried to explain to people what that moment meant, and I am never quite able to get it right because it sounds simple when I describe it. A man walked into a hospital and signed a form, but what he was actually doing was deciding, permanently and without hesitation, that my life was worth interrupting his own for. Not because he was obligated to, not because it was convenient, because I was his brother's son, and he had made a private decision somewhere along the way that he was not going to let me disappear. I was 17, and I thought I understood what I meant to Spencer. I did not yet understand the full weight of it. I understand it better now, as an adult, when I can see what it costs to show up for someone consistently, year after year, when there is no formal requirement to do so, and plenty of easier options. He did not make a big thing of what he did. He never framed it as a rescue or a sacrifice. When I brought it up once, a few years after the move, he shrugged and said, "You're family. That's what family does." I didn't say anything for a second. Then I said, "Not all family." He looked at me for a moment, then he nodded once, slowly, like he was acknowledging something he'd known for a long time. "No," he said, "not all family." The houseplant, for what it's worth, turned out to be a monstera. It is enormous now, nearly ceiling height, and it lives in the corner of Spencer's living room and is genuinely the most thriving thing in that house, which is saying something because Spencer has 23 plants at last count. I bring it up because on the day I moved in, we stood in the living room and looked at it, and I asked again what it was called, and he still didn't know. So I looked it up on my phone and told him, and he said, "Huh, good name." Then he showed me my room, which had a new mattress he had clearly bought recently, still with the plastic wrapping in the corner, and a lamp on the nightstand with a note taped to the base that said, "Make yourself at home. This is your home." I still have that note. I kept it because I knew, even at 17, even still in pain and on crutches and not sure what came next, that not everyone gets a moment like that. Not everyone gets a person who means it. I got one. That turned out to be enough. I've thought a lot about cause and effect over the years, not in any cosmic sense, just in the plain, observable way that decisions compound. The way a single moment of indifference can alter the entire trajectory of a life, and the way a single moment of showing up can do the same thing in the opposite direction. My mother made her choices. She made them consistently over years in small ways that I kept finding excuses for. And then she made one final large choice in a hospital hallway that removed all the ambiguity. She was 45 minutes away. She had a working phone. She had a son who couldn't feel his leg. And she decided, without much visible internal conflict, that the spa day came first. That is not a monster's decision exactly. It's something almost more troubling than that. It's the decision of someone who had practiced not caring for so long that it had become effortless. I don't say that with bitterness anymore, mostly. I say it because I think it's important to look at clearly. There's a version of this story where I spend the rest of my life trying to figure out what was wrong with me, that my own mother couldn't love me the way she loved my sister. I tried that version for a while. It doesn't go anywhere useful. What I came to understand, slowly and imperfectly, is that some people's limitations have nothing to do with your worth. My mother was not incapable of love. She loved Brooke freely and fully. She was incapable of extending that love past the family she had chosen to prioritize. That's a failure of character, not a verdict on me. Understanding the difference between those two things took me longer than it should have. But once I got there, I didn't need to go back and relitigate it. Spencer showed me something I couldn't have articulated at 17 but understand well now. That integrity is not a feeling. It's a practice. It's what you do when the feeling isn't there, when showing up is inconvenient, when nobody's watching and there's no reward at the end. Spencer drove 2.5 hours on no notice, because it was right, not because it was easy. He signed paperwork that changed both our lives because standing aside would have required him to be someone he wasn't. That's not heroism in the dramatic sense. It's just a person who had decided, quietly and in advance, what kind of person he was going to be, and then acted accordingly when it was tested. I think about that a lot when I'm faced with my own decisions, not the big dramatic ones, but the ordinary moments where the easier path is right there and the right path requires more. The friend who needs a call, return when I'm tired. The commitment I made that became inconvenient. The thing I know is true that would be simpler to leave unsaid. Spencer didn't make a speech about any of it. He just showed up, over and over for years before the accident and after it. That consistency was the thing. I'm not the same person I would have been if I'd stayed. I know that clearly. The version of me who stayed would have spent another year in that house, being tolerated, would have left at 18 for college with a very specific set of wounds, and almost no model for what a real relationship looked like. Instead, I had 2 years living with someone who demonstrated daily that you could be both honest and kind, both self-sufficient and present for the people you love. That's what I carry. Not the accident, not the hearing, not my mother's voice in the doorway on the day I left. I carry Spencer standing up in that hospital hallway and saying, "Tell me what to sign." Some people get a person like that. I got one. I built my whole adult life from that.